All right. So you should currently see on your screens, and I just need a couple of people just to throw out that yes if you see me scrolling through the actual RFA. I just want to make sure that what I'm speaking about is actually what you're seeing on your screen, as my screen shows a little bit differently. All right. Thank you so much. So you'll see here the request for applications, and we have a number of things in there, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll just be dealing with those budget sections. So we'll be going down to section 10.5 to start, and going through, I'll give you some highlights. And there we go. If I can get all the way down to section, here we go. All right, so you can see in the budget section, Appendix E, there are a number of things that relate to the budget. And the first that we'll deal with, I'll talk about it in the budget section in context of the RFA, and then I'll go out to the documents themselves. So this particular document is an overview of what it is that you're requesting funds for. So as you'll see here, this is Appendix E, and one thing I'm going to do, I'm going to shrink it just a little bit so we can squeeze a little bit more of it on one page. So here you have Appendix E and just the basic guiding overarching budget categories for the grants as we have them set up here at the co-board. So project director, other staff, fringe benefits, travel, and other direct costs. And I'll go back to the RFA and give you a little bit more of what those mean. And then here you'll see cost sharing for applicant. And also in the RFA, it does notice that if you do have a waiver that you can submit that in place of the actual amount, which will exempt you from having to do the 10% cost sharing as required by the RFA. So things to highlight just in terms of this section, I'm going to make the grave assumption that everybody has read it either individually or in your writing team to make sure that you all have kind of put together an understanding. But I want to highlight that the initial funding for this particular opportunity is up to $100,000. And what we mean by that is once we review your proposal, we'll go through and determine a cost amount, and we'll converse with those awarded applicants as well in terms of how much money do you need if particularly you're brand new at launching these co-requisite models and support strategies for students to be successful in them. Versus if you have more experience and you need fewer funds for the actual initial implementation, and then everybody will be on the same scale as it relates to the completion side of the funding piece. But again, this 100,000, you can request in Appendix E, like if you have a tutoring initiative that you want to implement, you would lay all of that out. And then for initial funding only, that's what we're asking for in regards to that initial budget. And then for completion funding, that'll be put in down here in terms of what it is that you expect to accomplish in terms of outcomes as it relates to completions for those courses that you want to consider for this particular funding opportunity. So if you have a project director or co-director, it's not explicitly listed in the budget section, but a lot of questions that we got were regarding, oh, is there a salary cap for the project director or other professional support staff? And the question is no. However, in terms of presenting a strong application, you just want to make sure that the costs are reasonable, particularly as it relates to the overhead cost of your human capital that's administrative. Now, when you get down into that piece where it's for your actual tutors, mentors, faculty related things that actually are directly related to serving the students, definitely we would anticipate a little higher cost there. But for the project director cost, we're asking that grantees keep it reasonable. And then on here, just note that when you do the little budget narrative piece, and that's where you're listing out in Appendix E, which is right here in the little box for the purpose and explanation. Also in this column, that the percent of time on project, that you'll need to highlight that. And if it is indeed in kind support that this particular initiative will be given, definitely list that as well. Other professional and support staff, that'll include anybody who is not listed as the project director. And one more piece about the project director, we're asking that you list a project director and a co-project director. And again, that's not necessarily from a monetary perspective, but for the operation of the grant. And then in there, in the personnel section, there's some guidance that was put in terms of how those roles are recommended to be structured. Fringe benefits, note roughly for just about everyone, we consider about 28% for a fringe benefits package. And if it's different than 28% when we do the calculation, that's where I'll just let you know if it's different than, if it's well above 28%, I highly encourage you to give some granularity to those particular breakdowns to help the strength of your application. With the travel, and it may or include local or state travel and professional development training. Oftentimes with the implementation of co-requisite models, faculty need training. So working across the lines of the college level course and the developmental ed sector, you may opt to include some professional development opportunities for your faculty. However, note that anything that's considered out of state, like I know they have national developmental ed conferences such as NAID, that would require prior approval from the coordinating board in terms of why that particular training is required, and that training need cannot be met locally within a state. And again, that's all in an effort to curtail the overhead cost and to make sure as many of the funds as possible are used in direct relation to student service. Other direct costs, and that's kind of like the catch-all for anything that doesn't fit into the above categories. And I'll just ask that you provide some granularity there into not just we might buy XYZ, but to the best of your ability, go ahead and just let us know what you're planning to do. A question in the FAQ that's out there: can technology be purchased? Can computers, furniture be purchased with these funds? And if it's in direct support to the scaling and implementation for the co-requisite model, the answer is yes. But that does require prior approval from the coordinating board, and that's out there in the FAQ. And just to give you a little bit of background on how these documents play together, once we provide guidance on the question in the FAQ, it then complements what's in the RFA. We've done due diligence to make sure that there's, to the best of our ability, that there's no conflicting language. However, in the event that there is conflicting language, the more stringent rule would apply. So as we're answering the frequently asked questions, those will be guiding principles for the awarded applicants to follow. So as you construct your budget and what you want to do in terms of your narrative for your grant, definitely I encourage you to go out and review the frequently asked questions, and that'll guide you with the and that'll provide additional guidance to what's already there. I see a couple of questions, and I think a couple of people are having connectivity issues, and I hope that's not the vast majority, but there's a couple of people that noted in the chat that they cannot see or hear anything. I'd encourage you to leave the call and rejoin and see if that would correct the issue. And you won't, I'll address the two questions that just came in. With the 10% for the project director, one of the things that's usually the I can't remember. You're absolutely correct, Charles, that it is listed in the program director role that allocate up to 5% each year or 10% of the total grant award towards the salary for this position. So, if indeed you are going to enhance someone's position as a result of taking on these additional duties in managing this particular grant, definitely pay close attention to that 10%. But even within the context of that 10%, though it's our threshold, I would encourage you to still keep it reasonable. In case in point, we have faculty and faculty members, particularly that are in administrative roles, that have a very generous salary provided to them based on their role and information. So definitely, if that 10% becomes 20,000, 25,000 for one person as part of your proposed grant, you can see how, in terms of that can shift the weight of what's going indirect in terms of overhead costs to versus those of direct costs directly to the grant. And if anybody is having connectivity issues and you can see and cannot hear me, this webinar is being recorded, and I will put it out there on our THECB website as well. There was another question that came in. How do we attain prior authorization in advance of the deadline? Don't worry about that just yet. Go ahead and do your proposal. And if we see that you've requested technology, when we go for those awarded applicants, there's a process that follows the awarding called negotiation. And that's where we'll really go more in depth and let you know what we really embrace about your application. And we'll also provide feedback on things that we would like to see specifically in the context of your operation and or the feasibility thereof. So we'll have some conversation on what it is that you'll actually do in relationship to your proposal. And again, just note, international travel is not an allowable expense. So if you find that great conference that's in Canada, cannot do it under this opportunity. So just definitely keep that at helm. And I'm stressing a lot of this because if you are awarded funds under this grant opportunity, the granular budget that you do, as I like to call your shadow budget, where you actually list exactly what it is that you're doing and you're spending your money on, minus the initial funds, we're not asking you for budget reports related to what you're spending that completion funds on, but you still are you still are required to follow all of the applicable rules and regulations, not only of the state, but of this RFA and the rider that's attached to this particular RFA. And then just for the purposes, I'll clarify the only things that I'm actually going to be addressing in this webinar are the things that are specifically outlined in that email, which are the appendices for the budget. If you have a specific question about anything else, it needs to be submitted directly in line with the inquiry section of the RFA, and that's submitting it to the cri@thecb.state.tx.us email. So if I glance over a question and I don't answer it, that's why. You'll just need to You'll just need to submit it that way. And that way, everybody who submitted a notice of intent will be republishing that frequently asked questions on Monday as the close is tomorrow. And then everybody will have the same, essentially, access to the personalized information via the questions. So that's just a little bit background on that. Should we leave competition completion funding budget over 100K or reduce to be within the RFP budget guidelines? Keep in mind when I'm talking about the initial budget, if you look at the document here, if you're looking at this document, the only thing we're asking you to kind of like expressly say what you're going to use that initial money for is these particular categories. In the narrative of your application, you have already addressed all of the strategies that you need or that you will be using in order to meet the outcomes of the grant. And then the actual total projected funding based on completions is outside of that band right here is referencing section 10.7 and appendix F. So when you get to the completion funding, that's outside of the band of those funds that you'll express initially what you're going to do within the context of these boxes. However, like I said, in the narrative, we should be able to gather a strong picture of what it is that you will be doing as far as moving the needle for success of co-requisite models or scaling up co-requisite models on your respective campuses. Going back to my guiding document. So this is where it gets, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the projected funding based on completions. It's Appendix F, and with the completion funding terms, again, the budget narrative outlining how the projected funds for completions will be used in alignment with Rider 37, and that's also in the appendice. And we also list out there for the final report what you'll include there. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go down to or back out to this document and in Appendix F, the completion funding terms. So understanding that outside of the initial payment that I just talked about in that particular budget, you'll be receiving, you have the potential to receive funding based off your completions of students that successfully complete the college level course that's attached to your co-requisite model. So it'll be outlined or that completion funding will go in terms of here. And the biggest thing is right here that note that the funding terms for the academic year one and academic year two, that they're different. And as a guiding principle, in terms of for this opportunity, we define successful completion of the co-requisite college level course as students who earned a grade of A, B, or C in that college level course. Now, in advance, do not go to your registrar's office and tell them the coordinating board said that only students that pass the classes with A, B, or C actually successfully complete the course. This is for purposes of this grant opportunity. So I don't want this to be practice in terms of something that you do institutional wide as a result of something that we've listed here, because successful completion is also defined in other areas. The CBM guide as well, or the CBM, the reporting manual, but it's not necessarily saying that only students that make a grade or A, B, or C actually pass the course. That's not what that's saying. It's just saying for the purposes of this competition, successful completion is defined in terms of you'll be paid that $250 per student that makes a grade of an A, B, or C in that college level course. And I can feel the hamster wheels turning in terms of considering co-requisite models as a whole. So if our grading schematic, if they pass the developmental ed course or the intervention and they are not successful, or they make a D or F in the college level course. Oh, will we get paid for that? No, you will not. So definitely just kind of own in on that and think about that. Discuss it with your reporting team or your reporting official at your institution as well in terms of exactly what that means. So moving down to the actual um, verbiage on terms of how for academic year one that successful completion funding will be determined. So you'll see here that for academic year one is the potential for fall 2018, spring 19, and summer 2019. And just a reminder, we have this on a call with the co-board yesterday that summer sessions are um, do fall under House Bill 2223. So if you're offering developmental ed courses, exit level developmental ed courses that students aren't exempt and they would fall into that denominator in your House Bill 2223 calculation, that you are required to still make sure that those respective percentages are um, that students enrolled in co-requisite models at the required percentages as per House Bill 2223. So I just wanted to highlight that as well. So you'll notice that it says the academic year one funding base is based on meeting the minimum threshold of 25% and the actual percentage of co-requisite enrollments and successful completions of co-requisite college level courses according to the following schedule. So this is your baseline. So provided that you meet the 25% minimum threshold for enrollment for House Bill 2223, you are absolutely eligible for successful completion funding under this opportunity. If you do not meet the 25% threshold for House Bill 2223, and you will not be eligible for completion funding despite the number of completions that you had. So that's just a big caveat to understanding this language. So again, just one more time, when I say the minimum threshold of 25%, I'm referring specifically to the requirement under House Bill 2223 for fall 2018, its first semester of implementation, that institutions must enroll 25% of its students enrolled in developmental ed courses in co-requisite models. And if you're A1, and keep in mind that the completion funding, there's no limit to it in terms of if it exceeds 100,000. Again, that's separate from completion funding. Completion funding is separate from the initial funding, and I think I addressed that a little earlier. The question just kind of popped in again, so I didn't know if it was like literally a re-ask or if does completion funding apply to all areas of developmental ed, even if our grant focuses only on one area? I encourage you to really think this out. So if you want completion funding for your INRW co-requisite or your integrated reading writing co-requisite models as well as your math, you can absolutely propose both. It's not one or the other. You can work in tandem across the aisle in terms of subject matter to develop a proposal that addresses both of your needs. However, if you do not address one or the other, it would be on a case by case basis and pending the circumstances in terms of the progress of the awardee in terms of if I would go back and consider, or if we would go back and consider allowing you to add a subject that wasn't previously that wasn't previously considered by you all in your initial application. So getting into the example for academic year one completion funding. So let's just say, like right here, if you have 0 to 24% enrollments in co-requisite models, you are not eligible for anything under completion funding per student. For those that meet the minimum percentage of 25% and you go up to 29%, you have the potential to be funded at $200 per student um, per completion. And then our goal again is the scaling of co-requisite models. So as you go higher and higher, you get more and more per completion. So 30 to 39%, you have $250 per completion, and then 40% plus, you have $300 per completion. And when you're considering this and setting this up, you have to give a lot of thought to where you are in terms of scaling your co-requisite models. So if you know you're already at the 25% and you're doing your funding calculation for year one, you're not going to do it at $300 a student. It would be, well, we anticipate a 25, 26% enrollment in co-requisite models, and that will be determined in advance based off the availability of your offerings as compared to what your entire um, number of offerings are for your developmental ed population. So if you have, for instance, developmental ed courses that total, and this is going to test my ability to do math on the spot, but if you have 100 students, I'll just use a rough round number. If you have 100 students in your entire developmental ed population, you know that you need minimally of 25 of those students to be enrolled in your co-requisite models to meet the threshold of House Bill 2223, even to be considered for completion funding. So if indeed you meet that 25, and let's just say, oh, we actually had 31 students enroll in co-requisite models, and the rest of the students were enrolled in our traditional model developmental ed courses, or um, you'll be at the 250. So I hope that makes sense, because I know we had a lot of questions just in terms of the frequently asked question document in terms of how does the funding work? And I always use 100 just to use even percentages. Here, you'll find a pretty clean example of how we did it. Institution A, you've met the minimum threshold of 25%. You report 28% of your students enrolled in DE. 125 of those students successfully completed a college level course. So according to figure one, 28% going up here, $200 per student. And then you'll have a $20,000 completion funding award based off that 125 students at $200, which equals 25. Did we get that wrong? The math is there. I'm losing my mind because I was like, I hate to see those mistakes in there. So you see how it works. So you can plug the numbers in, and we can get that there. Moving to AY2, this is where it becomes a little bit more complicated, because as you can see, the terminology even changes that we're using to address completion funding. So up here, we just simply have successful completions. And then when you move to AY2, and again, that'll be fall 19, spring 20, and summer 2020, it's performance improvements. So now you've created a baseline with your year one performance that will be used in your calculation for year two. And I'm going to pause 1 second. I had a couple of questions that came in. It says, does college level completion mean one semester completion, or if it takes a student 2 semesters to complete, are they still counted as completers? Under House Bill 2223, students must complete the first college level course in 1 semester. So as related to this grant, students must complete that first college level course in 1 semester. So if it's 2 semesters, they'll not be eligible for funding. And again, under House Bill 2223 with the co-requisite models, the just-in-time support, i.e., the developmental ed course or the intervention should be offered in tandem with the college level course. They shouldn't be offered across semesters. However, for those lower skill students, if you still have a traditional developmental ed program where the student takes the exit level developmental ed course or intervention and then enroll the following semester um, in the first college level course, they will not be considered for funding as part of this opportunity. So again, transitioning back to the performance improvements, the calculation. So looking at the figure, it's based on corresponding semester to AY1. So successful completions of co-requisite college level courses in AY2 fall 2019, 200. Successful completions in year one, 125. And then you have the difference between the second year and the first year, which yields 75 additional completions. So you scaled up your co-requisite model by 75 completions. And keep in mind here that in year two, that the minimum threshold for House Bill 2220, why can I say that right now? House Bill 2223 actually increases as well to that 50% mark. So the same with the requirement for AY1, you have to minimally meet the threshold of House Bill 2223 in order to be considered for completion funding in academic year two. So going into the example that we've provided, the increase in numbers of successful co-requisite college level completions from AY1, fall 2018 to fall 2019 will determine the total completion award. And this right here will be based on each semester. So although we have fall here, you'll do fall, spring, summer. So if you're offering co-requisite modeled courses, your baseline for all of these numbers in academic year two will be those that are achieved in academic year one. So going back to the example, the AY1 fall 2018 to AY2 fall 2019 will determine the total completion award for AY2 fall 2019. So if, like I just showed you in the figure, if the 200 students and then AY2, the fall completions are 125, you have an additional 75 completions. And the difference between that semester in AY2 and that semester in AY1 of 75, that's what you will be awarded on. And all completions for AY2 will be awarded at $300 per additional completion. Question: if our proposal has a math and INRW component and our percentages are different, then the funding for AY1 would vary for each component. And then for AY2, will we calculate separately? Your answer is yes, you would calculate separately. And I'll explain that when I go into this document right here that gives you a little bit more granularity to what you'll actually submit to us as part of your grant. So I have covered so far Appendix E, just going through the budget, noting that the completion funding is separate than the initial budget that you'll set forth, although you'll give us prose or narrative in the context of your grant as to what initiatives you'll be implementing, hence what you'll use your completion funding for. But all we're asking you to explicitly budget are those items that you are proposing initial funds for. And that's the money that we're going to upfront to you. And that number can be up to $100,000. And again, that number that's up to 100,000. If you have initiatives that you need funding for that starts off at 100,000, and then you have an additional $250,000 in potential completion funding, that is absolutely fine. But the max for initial funding it requests is 100,000, and we'll send you those funds if you're awarded prior to the start, well prior to the start of the fall semester, to help you go ahead and start getting those particular things in place. And I just want to make sure I went through 10.5, 10.6, and then the rest that we'll spend our time on is pretty much in this document right here with the appendices. I've went over again Appendix E. I've covered Appendix F, the completion funding terms, as well as for AY1 and AY2. And now I'm going to transition to just another conversation regarding completion funding, but this is the actual calculation worksheet that you will submit. So for the question that I just addressed in terms of if you're doing INRW and a math component and your anticipated percentages are different, this is where you'll lay all of that out by semester and by subject area. So if you have INRW, you can have a fall 2018 category for INRW. And then so if I were doing that and I was doing both a math and an INRW example, I would do, and I'm just being real general here, and then you can essentially this same particular this same fall 2018, and then it would just be INRW, and you would have your calculations for each subject area separately. And I hope that makes sense. And that's why we put the forms out there in Microsoft Word form, so you can go in and amend them definitely to your need. All of this information up here is static. And then again, semester, and then you can break out each subject area. If not, it'll get a little bit of confusion for you. If you know that for each semester right here, the anticipated House Bill 2223 percentage of co-requisite enrollments, if you know that it's going to be higher in the next semester, you can definitely adjust that percentage as well. You do not have to use the 25 and 50% as entries here for the sake of your funding, because again, you want to consider how many enrollments you're going to have to be as accurate as possible for your completions. Now, like here, we have 35%. Let's just say we shot for 35%, but we only came in at 28 in academic year one. We would just adjust the funding model. It's not going to be any big red flag to operation or anything. We just want to make sure that you understand that the 25 and 50% for the first and second year of House Bill 2223, that those are the minimum thresholds to be considered for funding. But anything that ebbs and flows above that will be adjusted accordingly on the completion funding side if you're awarded based off what your actual percentages are. So if you miss it, it's not the end of the world. But I encourage you to be ambitious, but at the same time, you have a lot of just give due diligence to understanding your calculation and what you're really going to go for, just to make sure that if you're using this to budget these completion funds, to budget for anything at your institution, that you're able to secure the amount of money that you're seeking for those respective semesters. An additional question: do we match the initial funding only? Yes, the match will be for the initial funding, for the initial funding, for the initial funding only, if that's indeed your, if that's indeed your, um, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. If you are required to do, if you're required to do um, the match. If a student fails both the college level course and the developmental course and must repeat both, is that student eligible for funding in the following semester? Great question. If the student, of course, if the student fails both, they will be eligible. So if they go back into a co-requisite model, if they go back into a co-requisite model, they will be eligible to be considered for completion for that following semester. How many semesters how many semesters does the completion funding go on for? So the completion funding, keep in mind, is broken out over 2 years. And for academic year one, it's fall 18, spring 19, and summer 19. And then respectively for academic year two, fall 19, spring 20, and summer 20. So it's a total of 6 semesters of completion funding, provided your institution is offering the applicable co-requisite courses for those respective semesters. And do we separate the subjects in the rows as you show or in column B? You will separate them in the rows. If you do it in column B, you're going to mess up the spreadsheet. So you're just going down. So you can have as many entries here, and I'm only asking you to break it out by subject matter. There's an additional document that we refer to in the RFA called a course verification document, or the course verification form. It's not provided as part of this, but to the awarded applicants, it will be. And in that document, you will actually list out the pairings of co-requisite models for all of the for the funding that for the completion funding that you're seeking. So if you have 10 sections of co-requisites co-requisite courses for math, you'll list those out. In the same respect, if you're doing multiple subjects, you'll list out all of those pairings on that document. But here, you can do them in aggregate for math and INRW. And again, we're looking at column B, anticipated enrollments for subject area. And note to understand how the House Bill 2223 calculation works, so you can anticipate that number accordingly. So you can deduct any exemptions that you might have for that. And this is your anticipated DE enrollment for your institution. So when you're looking at this, so when you're looking at column B, you really need to be considering what is going to be your entire DE enrollment that's subject to House Bill 2223. And that's the calculation that this is kind of designed to help you stay on par with. So for those institutions not on this call, you're actually getting a piece where you're kind of being forced to do it versus, I can only imagine it's going to be a surprise to some institutions who aren't paying close attention to that particular, the entire population versus who's enrolled. And then moving to column C, the anticipated total number of co-requisite enrollments. So, and then that's considering all of your co-requisite models. So again, in this example, we have 300 total that will be enrolled, and that's 300 DE enrollments that are subject to House Bill 2223. So let's just say we came up, oh, well, we had 400, and somewhere we took out 100 students because we know that this number of students are level 1 through 4. These number of students will be participating in a base NCBO, which are 2 categories of students who will not be considered in the House Bill 2223 denominator. And again, all of your reporting folk, have hopefully attended a co-requisite conference or have shared in a conversation or a conference call um, with our reporting team here at the coordinating board and received guidance on that. If not, submit your question through the inquiry protocol, and we can definitely get our reporting folk to respond via the frequently asked questions list. How many awards will be given? I'll hold off on that question. And to clarify, if a student completes a co-requisite course during the fall 2018, spring 19, or summer 19, even if he or she repeats a co-requisite during that time, that student counts as completing for AY1. And yes, because keep in mind, although I'm referring to it in aggregate as a year, completion funding is per semester. So if you're not offering any co-requisite or developmental ed courses, that's been a common question we've gotten in the field. Well, we don't offer any exit level co-requisite courses for the fall or any courses where students are subject to House Bill 2223 in our summer session. Well, you won't have any projected completion funding for the summer. So we're not saying that when the student has to do it, but a completion is a completion no matter when the student, no matter what semester the student completes it in, whether or not they're repeating the course. But do understand that we'll have some ebb and flow on your House Bill 2223 calculation. So just to note that. So column D, anticipated House Bill 2223 percentage of co-requisite enrollments. And I tried to lay this out to where you're doing the math, and that's the B divided by, or C divided by B, my apology, C divided by B. So that's 75 divided by 300, and that gives you that round 25%. So just know that through this, we're trying to guide you and helping you anticipate your House Bill 2223 calculation for each of the areas as well. And then E, that the completion paid per student, see figure 1. And I've touched on that if it's different, this number will be different. So if it falls between that 25 and 29%, it will be at 200. If it falls between 30 and 39%, it would be at 250. And if it's 40% and above, it will be at $300 in year 1 in terms of completion funding. And then now in section F, this is where the anticipated number of successful co-requisite completions. And I've listed out the actual number and then the percentage so you can see kind of like where they're falling. We encourage you to understand the trends on your respective campus. And in addition to that, in the past, it's been trending honestly about 75%. And that's the high side of it, 75% of successful completions of students in co-requisite models. So you want to do some brainstorming with your team there in terms of what are you shooting for in terms of the numbers of students that you actually enroll, the total number of students enrolled in the co-requisite models as compared to the number of students that actually finished the co-requisite model. So last, G just helps you lay out what you would get for completion funding for that particular semester. So in this particular case, E times F, so the 200 times the 53 completions, which equals the 10,600. And again, you would do one of these lines for each subject area for each semester that you're seeking, for each semester that you're seeking completion funding for. A question, what if we don't hit that percentage that we estimated in column F here? If you do not meet If you do not meet this, it's going to be based on your actual numbers. But again, minimally, you have to meet the 25% in year one and then the 50% in year two to for House Bill 2223 to even um, be considered for completion, funding. But going back to here, to give you an example, we anticipate, let's just say this number was 50, around about number 50. This percentage changes, and the only thing that really changes, you still met the threshold for House Bill 2223, so you're eligible for completion funding. Instead of being paid for 53 completions, you will just be paid for the actual 50 completions that you actually achieved. And then once you do that, and it's kind of hard to embed it in an Excel table, but you have this table here, and at the end, you'll put this grand total. You'll total everything up, and that'll give you your completion funding total for AY year one. And then moving on to performance improvements, the table gets a little bit more. Um, I don't want to use the word, it requires more attention, I'll say that, to make sure that you complete it appropriately. So now that you've completed your completion funding for AY year one, you'll move on to year two. And remember, year two, we're just looking at the difference in how did we scale up. So you'll have potential completion funding based on the difference between or the increase between year two and year one. So here in column A, again, following the same protocol, feel free to add any additional lines that you need to address varied subject areas. And then the total DE enrollment by subject area for that respective semester. And these columns are the same, a number of them are the same as what you're doing in um, the table for completion funding for AY1. There are a couple of differences, though, when you get to just one difference, like really when you get to, or two differences when you get to the end. So here, the same as above, anticipated number of co-requisite enrollments, the same, anticipated House Bill 2223 percentage of co-requisite enrollments is calculated exactly the same. Anticipated total number of successful co-requisite completions, exactly the same. And then again, this is going to be where you're, and at your institution, you're actually thinking through this and coming up with this number. And then anticipated successful completions from AY1 corresponding semester. And this is to help you guide it. So if you had 53, as we had indicated up here for spring 19, and I apologize, we didn't have the numbers correspond, but the 53, you'll go back to that corresponding semester. So in this case, if we used fall 2019, as an example, we're going back, my apologies, to here in academic year one to populate this column right here. So I tell you where to get that number from on table AY F1 column F. So you'll go up here to column F, and that's where that 53 actually came from. And that's your anticipated number, because as of now, everything is anticipated. Nothing is actual. And like I told you, don't fret. If you're anticipated, if you come in a little lower than your anticipated or way lower, provided you've met the respective percentages for House Bill 2223, you're fine. You met the threshold, you'll get the completion funding based off your actual numbers. So that 53 is there. And then the difference between, we anticipated 225 completions in fall 2019, which is scaling up, which yields a difference of 94. You would then be paid at 94 completions at the $300 rate. And we have a couple of questions that came in. What if we don't hit that percentage in F? I addressed that. And then if offering correct models on different campuses, do we report projected actual funding by campus, or can we aggregate data as one institution system wide? Great question. We actually we'll get back to you on that particular question because okay, because it all matters to how how do you report to us, because at first we were looking at a different couple of ways that people report. So if you're a larger community college district, some community college districts report as one entity under one FICE code, and you have some large community college districts that every one of their campuses has an individual FICE code. So I would say on there, I would say to that, for now, for the purposes of an unofficial answer, I would say provide as much granularity as possible because we have to go back and verify these numbers. So one of the important things is to understand, how does your institution report to the coordinating board? If you report as individual institutions, it would be independently. If you report as a entire system, I can imagine it could be by system. So to those awarded grantees, we'll give you granularity on reporting in more specificity then, but this is one of those questions that has arisen in a previous grant competition that we're actually currently working through. But definitely, that was a great question, Dr. Sigler. So as you can see, kind of like going back to this, and I want to be respectful of time, I'm a little bit over the hour mark now, but you can amend this to reflect what it is that you need to do. But again, and to Dr. Sigler, to your question specifically, when you submit the course verification form, that will be very granular. It'll be broken out by course and by institution, section number with the prefix involved. So we would be able to capture that information there. But for the purposes of this document, however you're submitting your application, that's how I encourage you to submit that, because again, it's all anticipated, and I just want to make sure that the numbers are correct and that you all understand how to use this particular document in terms of submitting your application. But the reporting piece, that'll actually be, you'll get more guidance on that for those institutions that are awarded. So just FYI, don't put that at the top of your radar in terms of worrying. For the sake of this document, if your application is coming in as a system, in aggregate, math, INRW for each semester, and if it's coming in as an individual campus, the same thing respectively. And then when you get to the bottom, let's just say we've calculated all of our numbers. Our projected AY2 completion funding is this number right here. And then you're going to go back in, and I've, again, tried to make it as easy as possible to guide you through this process, through these documents. So you'll then go back to projected AY1 funding, and you would put that number from table 1H in here. And then you add those two numbers together, and that gives you your total proposed completion funding. And this number that you come up right here, like your grand total for completion funding, is going to then be inserted in appendix. It says D, it should be E. And I'm trying to think, I'm going to make sure that the Word copy of the forms that we have out there, that they're the updated versions, because in that second amendment, we actually went back through and made a lot of corrections, but I'm thinking we don't have the updated set of forms out there, and I'll definitely make sure that we email those out to you if not today, by the end of the day tomorrow. But nothing in the overall operation of the forms change. It's just the narrative in terms of what I'm directing you to do. So that particular line item that I was just showing you right here, this 64,500, you would then take that number and it would be inserted in your overall budget right here on this line for completion funding grand total right there. And then you would add up all of those numbers and it would give you your total grant award. So hopefully, just hopefully, this has provided some additional insight to the forms, how they're used, and I've answered all of your questions adequately that you've had throughout our time together. And I just want to wish all of you best of luck with the grant competition. And our goal again is to award as many as applicants as, and I said I was going to come back to that question, but I honestly don't have an answer for that, like a specific answer, because we'll be considering all of the applications. And just to let you know, we received 50 letters of intent in terms of notifications of intent to apply. So there's a healthy pool out there. However, we do understand that for various reasons, institutions that did submit a letter of intent may not submit an actual application. So the funding for the number of awards will be based on the amount of funds and then what people are proposing, because just because letting you know, and many of you who've been through a grant process before knows that just because you propose it don't mean that you will get it. So just being clear with that, but our goal is to definitely have a mix of institutions that are new to the game in really implementing co-requisite models and those that are more seasoned, in addition to varied size of institutions. So we know some of the larger community college districts, you could potentially have way more completions versus if you're a smaller, not necessarily even a smaller institution, but your developmental education, or you have a smaller number of underprepared students that would be eligible for funding. So we'll be considering all of those as we make those final decisions in terms of the striation of the funding. But at the end of the day, our goal is to award as many institutions as possible that submit strong applications. So I don't anticipate. Oh, one last question. What is the maximum amount of completion funding? Um, that's not that's not an answer question I really have an answer for. There's not a maximum amount of funding that we've put a cap on. It's you really assessing what your institution can do. So we look at it in terms of being reasonable. Like I said, you want to understand the completion rates on your campus. If you don't have a 71% percent completion rate in your college algebra course, and that's what you're primarily co-recking with, you might not select that number. So again, the amount of completion fund is going to be very granular as it relates to the operation of the institution, the trends there, and whatever other factors that you need to consider. So we're leaning on you to really make a reasonable projection as to those completion funding amounts. And if indeed, hold on one second, I said we might have an answer to the question that I told you all don't worry about just yet. All right, so I just wanted to make sure, run that past Susanna, just popped in to check on how the webinar was going. That she had ran over and got a, clarification on Dr. Sigler's question about reporting, and I shared with her what I offered to you all, and she said that that was absolutely fine. So, indeed, there doesn't seem that there are no last minute questions that popped in there, and I'm a honor your time. Thank you for staying with me 13 minutes over. And again, for any of your colleagues that were unable to present, this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted on our website, hopefully within the week. We just launched a new website at the coordinating board. So that was hence the email you got with the updated link to the grant documents. So we've had some additional processes to get some information out there. So this information will be out there hopefully within the week. And if you have any final burning questions, definitely after this call, submit them by close of business tomorrow to CRI at THECB at state.tx.us. Again, thank you for your time and best wishes with your applications. Have a great day, everybody.